Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of CharitEpulse. My name is Catherine Rostomji. I head the charities practice at Shakespeare Martineau, and I am back with my regular partners for our podcast, which is James Saunders, audit partner at Moore Kingston Smith, and Charles Mesquita, investment director at Quilter Cheviot. So today is the day after the latest budget. I feel like the budget has been rolling for some time with all of the, what was it called? Kite flying, I think, when they give a little notion to test how it goes down. I think in terms of the impact on the charity sector, seems to me the removal of the two-child cap on child benefit is something many charities have campaigned for some time, but perhaps more wide-reaching would be the minimum wage increases and the impact that that could have on charities. James, if I come to you first, just your thoughts on, yes, a good thing for the minimum wage to be increased, but what's the knock-on effect of that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course, for the charity sector, I think it's fair to say the sector has an abnormally high level of employees who would be at that minimum wage level. So clearly, a wage increase for them, and the increase is larger if you remember the younger age. So that's good on one hand, but what you've got to remember with these sort of things is in all these organisations, there's a link between the minimum wage and then the next stratas of wages. So if you give the minimum wage a bump, you've obviously got to, almost certainly got to give the next levels up and throughout the organisation a bump as well. So I think it's the old law of unintended consequences, which actually is quite reasonably well known now, that the moment when the minimum wage goes up, all wages go up through an organisation. And the more people you've got at that minimum wage level, the more it impacts on you.
Absolutely. And Charles, I think you've been on your travels and having discussions with various charities and things. I think you had an example of the financial pressure that charities are under from the last budget.
Yeah, so I was talking to a hospice in the north of England, in fact, not very far from you, Catherine. Obviously, I mean, they had a turnover of about 1 million to 1.3 million, I think. And they said that the NI, national insurance contributions, employers had added another 33,000, of which they hadn't allocated into their budget. But also the other thing, which I completely, I mean, it's easy to forget, and talking about James's unintended consequences, is of course a lot of their pricing is against the NHS, and so when doctors and nurses and everything else salaries go up, so the hospices have to respond as well. But what I found really shocking, and I have to say I hadn't realised it, was that they only get 4% as a contribution from the NHS. Now, if we think about it, for a hospice, if it didn't exist, the NHS would have to provide. So there is definitely a big benefit the NHS is doing. But the reason being they're only getting 4%, because I always thought it was somewhere between 20 and 35, depending on which area they were, and I never quite understood why the inconsistencies. But because they don't have any in-house beds, so that therefore the commissioners don't really know how to fund it. And you just think this is really binary thinking. I just found it extraordinary.
Yeah.
And and the poor chief executive was literally tearing her hair out, and because they've got a real funding crisis, but also need is rising and huge pressures on them. So yeah, government's meant to be thinking about charities more, but I do sometimes wonder whether they think about the connectivity between various decisions and how that impacts.
So I think we'll wait to see what the response is to that from the sector. But yeah, as it was only yesterday, we haven't seen too much. But the various stories that caught my eye this week, the first one, quite a dramatic headline, that charities refuse to comply with the Home Secretary's migrant volunteering plan. And this article was talking about more than 300 charities and voluntary organisations have signed a letter to the Home Secretary saying they will refuse to comply with her, quote, immoral and impractical proposal to introduce a volunteering test for migrants applying for indefinite leave to remain in the UK. So interesting, I suppose, how charities do become a bit of that moral voice. And I think many have commented it's not volunteering if you're being made to do it, and whether charities should be in any way aligning themselves with this. But Charles, coming to you first, if you'd seen this article, whether you had any thoughts on that?
I took a slightly different view to this. I mean, there were statements like, volunteering always has and always will be voluntary. Well, yes, it is. But actually, if we think about it, the first volunteer organizations was medieval Britain. It was about 500 voluntary run hospitals. If the benefits of volunteering, and this is where I think the communication and the way they talk about it is completely wrong, in the respect, yes, you can't force anybody to volunteer, otherwise that goes against the principle of it. But actually, it is a fantastic way of integrating people into society and getting them to understand and know on both sides. So to my mind, we should be embracing the idea, but just persuading people of a different way of doing it. And actually, since the pandemic, we know the numbers of volunteering is down. I mean, I think from the NCVO's last almanac that they published, and I'm not quite sure how they work out what volunteering formally once a month, how that's calculated, but it's about 16% of the population, which is 7 million of people in England and 8.3 in the UK. We should be encouraging people to volunteer, but we should also, I think, be explaining to people what benefits that they get from volunteering, and actually how much fun it is. So I just found the coverage really quite being very negative, where they could have been much more positive.
Interesting. James, you feel negative or positive, or?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's in theory, you could see how this actually could have been quite a good idea. Well, it could in the end be quite a good idea, but it's just the way it's been put out, the way it's been used as a test. That's not what people want. People want, as Charles was saying, people want volunteers to be there voluntarily. I mean, it's the nature of it, and to bring it into a test of whether someone's allowed to stay in the country or not. It's messing up two ideas.
But James, I think it was a good idea that Home Secretary came forward with. I think I don't have any issues that if somebody wishes to volunteer, that should be taken as a positive for their application for citizenship. I don't have any issues with that. I think anything that forces people to do it, you're right, and it needs to be careful balance. But I think people should be encouraged to. So if that encourages them, great.
Interesting. Now I'm moving on to a slightly raw topic for me, only because I've got fear of missing out and a bit of envy that you two are now best friends with Joe Saxton when I wasn't around. So following on from your cosy chat with Joe, who's chair of the Association of Chairs, I'd seen an article this week that called for better learning and development being needed for greater trustee diversity, which I thought was an interesting angle we haven't necessarily seen. And this was a summary of an event where it was being suggested charities must offer better learning and development for trustees if they are then going to be able to recruit and also retain actually a more diverse board of trustees. Some of the comments were around trustees maybe staying for a year and then leaving. What was that all about? What is it that trustees want? What isn't being met at the moment? So I thought it was just an interesting angle. Charles, again, if I come to you first, had you seen this from your chat with your best friend Joe?
Yes, I did. And I just wonder what sort of angle they're coming from, because they were definitely talking. I think it was Holly Riley who's the Charity Commission strategic policy lead, talked about that they had definitely data of trustees for a year and then they would leave. I don't know how much of that is to do with training, induction, that people are time poor, or it's just meetings difficult. I mean, I know fair well on the boards I've sat on that, Glasspool, for example, when I arrived, I was the only person working today and everybody else was retired. Today, 95% of the board is working and 5% is retired, and trying to juggle families and times to meet and everything else is quite a challenging. Again, this to me is communication. Personally, I think we should be talking about actually the benefits of being a trustee. We've reflected on this before, but I know it has made me a better person, a better manager. I've met people that I never would. I've gone places that I've never done. I've thought about things that I never would have done if I hadn't been a trustee. And it has been the most fantastic experience, not without its challenges. The one thing I do think is a good idea is that if you ever join a board, that have some sort of mentoring rather than induction. I mean, I think you need a bit of induction, but actually it's that ongoing mentoring, because it's getting the knowledge, isn't it, of what the circumstances of the organization, the people and everything else, and having somebody that you can turn to for good counsel.
Yeah. And that trustee buddy, I think that's, it doesn't have to be over-engineered, but I think it makes someone feel welcome. It gets them involved, and effective quicker. So, James, any thoughts on this one?
Well, I would link it to the new Charity Commission designates comments this week that trusteeship is in crisis. And taking a slightly different a view of it, if you like, I think there's a lot of truth in this. I think trusteeship is becoming more and more onerous, and almost by the month at the moment, with more pressures on, if it's not diversity and inclusion, it's more knowledge around employee matters. I've said before, banging on several months now, about the new employment laws that are coming in. Over the course of the next 18 months, effectively, trustees need to be familiar, if not more knowledgeable, about those sort of things, because it's all coming through. Trustees are ultimately responsible. I was sitting in a trustee meeting yesterday with my auditor hat on, and the comments around the table were the amount of board papers that they had to deal with was excruciating. Everyone, every committee, every subcommittee, if you like, was doing more, and we needed to, and it was doing more at the request of regulators or the board, and that was all being reported in. It was all feeding through into very long board papers summarising matters on various topics, which were all covered. The meeting started with, look, this is going to be a long one because we've got an awful lot to do.
But again, I think that's just, people need to be. I mean, I like the idea of the buddying system. I think it's better than mentoring, because I think it's a nicer word. But James, I think this whole thing of just making things more and more bureaucratic and formulaic is not why people join boards. I think we just got to be creative and imaginative and produce less papers. And certainly where I'm chairing a board now, I'll sit down with the chief executive a week beforehand and ask them, what are the three things that we want to discuss?
Charles, I totally agree. And the board I was referencing yesterday they don't want these papers. They're not. This isn't a deliberate effort to. We really need more papers. They hated it, but it's just again unintended consequences of the more stuff. I mean, just little things like right now. If you're a director of a company, you've got new Companies House online registrations to do for ID verifications. That's got to be done by every director, which is effectively every trustee of a corporate charity. All these sort of things add up, and every time there's a meeting, there's something else coming out. It's not, like I say, they're not asking for these things. It's just that.
But James, once you've done it. But once you've done it once, that will be it. The Charity Commission. The Charity Commission is likely to do the same thing. We've got Gateway, the government system, and it just needs to have some joined up thinking, which they are progressively moving towards.
What I'm saying, Charles, is that with all this stuff that trustees get these days, it's not surprising to me in the slightest that people are reticent to volunteer on this basis.
I think that the amount, if the amount of benefit outweighs the inconvenience, in my view, and I think we should spend more time talking about actually what a privilege it is, and how much better we are as people for doing it. And actually, it's fun. I agree with you. There's a whole lot of boring stuff. Some of it you just got to just ignore and move on and focus on what we're meant to be doing, which is the purpose of the organisation we're set up for.
Right, James, don't rise to it. We will ignore and move on. And I'm coming to a topic you might like, James, because it's your world and I've put it in for you. So we've had the new SORP, which is going to apply to accounting periods after 1st January 2026. And charities are being urged to be more deliberate about the new impact reporting requirement, is what David Holdsworth, Chief Executive of the Charity Commission, has said. There is some counter-argument noise around whether that's possible, whether it's going to be useful, whether this is a good thing. But with your charity auditor hat on, I'd be interested in your views on impact reporting requirement and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think it's only required for the larger charities. So it's 15 million, isn't it? I think income level that you've got to put some impact reporting in. Now, impact reporting can take all sorts of different formats. It can be relatively light touch, and it can be very, very detailed, granular, depending on what you want to use it for. Really, I mean, the sort of the more purists, if you like, on social impact reporting, I think, would say a lot of the value, certainly from an accounting point of view, if you like, on my side, put a value, an ultimate end value, on how much society gains in pound terms from the pound that is spent on the activity, the charity's money, in effect. So a pound pound given or pound received by a charity at one end produces how much pounds worth of social, societal benefit at the other end. I mean, that's and often that £1 converts into 50, 100, much more than its original cost. That's one way of looking at it, and that's it's quite an extensive way of analysing these things, and it involves interviews and analysis and all sorts of workings to get to that point. I don't think that's what even the larger charities are going to be needing to do. They're going to have to be looking at what's the ultimate impact of your work, rather than just say, we paid for X amount of I don't know, training on nurses or teachers or something like that. It's the next step that's the interesting bit. What was the societal benefit of those people? For example, if you're an educational charity, getting the qualification that you funded, what's the value to society of that? How much was it? How much we saved by not getting them educated through the state? What benefit are they bringing in educating children or whoever they're? It's that next step that's going to be the interesting way of looking at things. And it's encouraged for smaller organisations to put some of this in their accounts, not mandatory, but it's encouraged. It's the way, I think, that it's a better way of reporting for charities, because charity is far more than money in, money out. We all know that. How do you show the true value and the true impact, rather than necessarily just the outputs for charity?
Charles, anything on this? Are you quite neutral? I hadn't picked up on that 15 million distinction about when it's a requirement and when it's optional. And I take that point, actually. For those charities, 15 million income plus, the big charities, why wouldn't they take the opportunity to report on their impact?
Well, I can give you a very good reason, because actually, and I have to say, I share Deborah Alcock-Tyler's view on this, who's the CEO of the Directory of Social Change, is that for lots of charities, it's very difficult to measure impact easily. And I think of, the medical research charity, where we're doing research on a thing. Can I measure the impact of that easily? No, I can't. I can tell you what the statistical changes are over a number of years, of which we would be part of, but we're only part of that solution. The other thing, if you remember, we had at one of our charity professional hubs, we had Professor Peter Frumpkin talking. And if you remember, in the US, this has become an industry in itself. And in fact, I looked up the figures. So collectively, the US charities spend on evaluation about 2% of total grant making. If you then put that into proportion in the UK, that would be about 100 million a year. I'm not sure that I think that measuring impact or spending 100 million on charitable purposes where I think the value is. I think it's spending the 100 million on charitable purposes and getting it. And the other thing was David Holdsworth made a comment about public benefit. The statement's now a bit of a tick box in the thing. Well, I'm terribly sorry, but Glasspool, we're doing relief of poverty. Why do I have to make a statement about the public benefit? Is it not in the title of what we're doing? Do I have to really tell them that we've considered this and it's for the public benefit? Of course it is. Yeah,
That's the point, and we talked about this before, haven't we, Catherine, about the registration with the Charity Commission. If you're a registered charity, you must be there for the public benefit.
Correct.
Point in stating it, yeah, absolutely unnecessary in the accounts.
Yeah.
Okay, now last story for this week is the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, has published a voluntary code for prize draw operators, which encourages those that advertise a charitable contribution to register with the fundraising regulator. So far, 20 operators have signed up to the code, and so far you might be thinking, so what? How does this apply to our beloved podcast? But as we have regularly talked about before, we have looked at Omaze, and Omaze is one of the 20 that has signed up. But interestingly, that's the lead for any article these days, is people referencing Omaze. So it definitely has this profile. Any thoughts, James? I'll come to you first on the fact that Omaze and others have signed up to this voluntary code.
Oh yes, brilliant voluntary code. I mean, it helps. We've said on numerous times the whole Omaze situation is very difficult. I find myself torn about this because it has given an awful lot of money to charity. The most recent accounts are on Companies House and been published, signed off in September. £46 million passed on to charity. Interestingly, they term it as charitable donations, which I'm interested in because the charity donation is part of the business model. I'd be interested to know quite how they, to me, it could easily be seen as a cost of raising the revenue in the first place, a cost of sales in effect. So they're treating it as a voluntary charitable donation. But I would wonder if it's, people buying the tickets for Omaze, if you took out the "this is all for charity" line, would they buy those tickets? I mean, they might buy it just because they want the house, like you, Catherine. But it's interesting. I mean, so the entity itself, the whole organisation, is less in deficit than it was previously. So it's making some, it's positive returns. It's still not clear exactly who it's for and what they're doing. I mean, that's why I say I'm torn. It's very murky, especially with Omaze America being involved, which, as we know, has ceased operating for the time being. I haven't seen to look to see whether they're back up and running or not, but it looked a bit murky over there. And the whole model is very strange, really. But the fact that they're signing up to this voluntary code, it's okay. Thanks.
Murky and strange is not good, is it? But the house in Richmond, I'm telling you, it's beautiful. Been on the virtual tour, had a look round. But it is interesting.
Tickets?
No, I don't buy the tickets. In the same way, I'm never going to win the lottery because I haven't bought a ticket. But I'm not going to also win the Omaze house. But it is interesting because in this article they talk about operators that provide a charitable contribution as part of a prize draw, and I think that contribution is a cost of doing business for them. It's not a donation, isn't it? Yeah. So, Charles, any thoughts?
Yeah, I go back to what we've already covered before, but looking up the statistics, which comes from DCMS's independent research, is that prize draws are worth about 1.3 billion annually. And you've got about 7.4 million adults participating and over 400 operators. Well, gambling is 15 billion, and 88%, I think, of the participants are people who will also gamble as well. Sorry, this sits with the Gambling Commission. I don't understand. I even tried to look up why. The fact that you can enter it without actually paying any money is the only criteria. That to me. Yep. So I would love to know from Baroness, whoever it is at DCMS, of why it is different from any other gambling. And the other thing is, although it's voluntary, what does voluntary really mean? The fundraising code is although it's voluntary, is not voluntary. Sorry, you have to sign up to it, and rightly so. I always had a problem when they launched that it should be voluntary, because it ain't voluntary. So I think this should, and I don't understand why prize draws should have a lighter regulatory regime compared to gambling.
Agreed. I'm going to call time now, chaps. I think we've covered a lot. Thank you, James and Charles. Thank you for joining us. Do please feel free to like and share our podcast on various platforms. If you have any comments, you might strongly disagree with things that we've said, we'd love to have a bit of interaction and hear from you. And also, if you have suggestions for future topics, let us know. But hopefully you can join us for another session in the future. Thank you.